This episode contains graphic details. Viewer discretion is advised.
Miss Keegan, 911, where's your emergency?
It's 4788 Marshall Road. I woke up to go to work.
4788 Marshall?
Yeah, and my son's not breathing.
How old is he?
I checked on him before. He's 15. He's been on a hunger strike. He just wouldn't eat lately. And I've been checking on him all night because he said he wasn't feeling good last night. And I woke up to get ready for work this morning, and he's not breathing.
Okay, can we get him flat on his back so we can start CPR?
Yes. He's on his back.
Okay, is he on the floor?
Yes, he's on the floor. I had to get him off his bed.
How long has it been since he's eaten?
He ate yesterday, but he hasn't eaten. He's driving me crazy because he wouldn't eat hardly, and so he got really skinny and he won't eat. And I was just about to call the doctor this morning because he's just been horrible. I mean, he's just a teenager. He's 15, and he did eat yesterday, but not a lot.
Okay, when was the last contact with him?
I checked on him at 5:30.
This morning?
Yeah.
And he is still breathing?
Yeah.
Shanda Vander Ark called 911 on July 6, 2022 to report that her 15-year-old son Timothy Ferguson was not breathing. She would go on to tell the operator and then responding officers that Timothy had been on a hunger strike, but she didn't realize how thin he was. She also told the operator that she had checked on him at about 5:30 that morning and he was fine. The 911 call was around 6:30, so her claim was that she had checked on him only an hour before, which responding officers immediately questioned due to the fact that rigor mortis was already starting to set in when they had arrived. It takes between 2 and 6 hours for rigor mortis to start setting in, with full rigor happening between 6 and 12 hours. When the officers on the scene started noticing a number of red flags around the house, they called in detectives who quickly learned that nothing that Shonda had told them about the night Timothy died was true. This is Monsters. Shonda Ramsey was born on March 13, 1979, and not much is on record about her childhood. She would tell people she was from Alabama, but it's unclear if she was born there or just moved there when she was a baby. Her sister, Paige Eaton, would make a statement to investigators explaining that she and Shonda spent about 2 years in foster care when they were about 6 and 9. Paige said that they were both abused while in foster care, and the abuse consisted of starvation, ice baths, and being beaten with clothes hangers or ping pong paddles. Now, Paige has done some other interviews and has said a lot of things that can't be confirmed, so I don't want to use a lot of her claims here. In my opinion, she seemed too eager to get in front of cameras when she found out her sister had been arrested, and I think some content creators are too eager to exploit that, which just leads to a lot of unreliable claims. But if her claim about the abuse in foster care is true, it would be interesting because it matches what Shonda had done with her own child. And Paige made that statement to the police only a few days after Timothy's death, but she might have heard some of the details on the news and made her story match. It's really hard to say. Shonda also claimed that her father and then her stepfather sexually abused her when she was a child, but she didn't mention any abuse while in foster care during that interview. Shonda moved around quite a bit in her life, but in 1996 she was attending Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. That was where she met Eric Ferguson, who had been born in Yakima, Washington. He had lived in 45 of 50 states as well as 8 different countries because his parents were missionaries. Neither Eric or Shonda had completed college when she became pregnant, and the couple married, settling down in North Carolina. Now, it seems as though Eric already had at least one child before marrying Shonda around 2000. I'll get into that a little later. Eric and Shonda's first child, Eric Ferguson Jr., who went by his middle name Nolan, was born on March 27, 2000. Their second son, Paul, was born on April 20, 2002. They had a daughter, Millie, on June 20, 2004, and their youngest child together was Timothy, who was born on August 6, 2006. Timothy would eventually be diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, but he was high-functioning and he spent the time that he was in school in regular classes. Not long after Timothy was born, Eric was transferred to Oklahoma by his employer, Hartford Insurance Company, and they found a house in War Acres just northwest of Oklahoma City. It wasn't long before CPS became involved with the family. The first reports came in February of 2008, just 18 months after Timothy was born. The Oklahoma Department of Human Services received reports of inadequate nutrition, medical neglect, exposure to adult sexuality, domestic violence, threat of harm, dirty home, and dangerous shelter in the home. When a social worker inspected their home, they found food on site and found the home to be adequate. The children were underweight and doctors were unable to find an explanation as to why the children, especially the baby Timothy, was not thriving. Shonda agreed to take Timothy to the doctor where she described all the food that Timothy was eating, and the doctor reported to the social worker that there was no way the baby would not be thriving if she was truly giving him the food she claimed she had. Over the following investigation, Eric and Shonda's file was marked as failure to cooperate, and eventually Shonda became angry with the social worker, claiming her rights were being violated. After that, she refused to allow the social workers to complete their investigation. In October of 2009, police got reports of sexual abuse happening in the home, and officers along with social workers went to their home for a welfare check on the children. Eric and Shonda initially refused the officers or social workers into the home, but the police informed them that checking that the children were okay was not optional. The parents relented, and the officers reported that the home was environmentally neglectful. The report went on to state, quote, "The home was found to have a very strong odor of human feces and animal feces, and every room in the home was in a filthy condition. Miss Ferguson told the worker, 'I'm a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids. I homeschool my children and do not have time to clean.' The carpet in the entire home was filthy. The worker observed that every room in the home also smelled of urine. The children's bathroom toilet had human feces stains in it that appeared to have been there for a long time. There was old food in every room and dirty diapers were in every room. Worker did observe plenty of food in the home, but the fridge was extremely dirty. All utilities appeared to be working. There were 3 snakes in cages, a hamster, and several dogs that lived in the home. Nolan disclosed that one of the snakes had bit him before. All the children were found to appear dirty and unkempt." Social workers also reported that an electrical outlet in the house had been pulled from the wall, and Shonda claimed that Paul had done it because of his ADHD. That will become a common theme in this case. Shonda will be questioned about something that's wrong, and she will blame it on one of her kids. The following day, authorities returned to the home with an order to remove the children. When the older children were interviewed, they described some extremely disturbing behavior happening in the home. The social workers noted that they were shocked at how much the parents minimized what was going on. They also noted that Eric stated that, when he was 14, he touched his 11 to 12-year-old sister's vagina multiple times and was told the behavior was normal. Here's a little disclaimer for that. No, it's not. At all. It's not even close to being normal. Nolan, being the oldest, was able to give the most details that would end up being rather revealing. He talked about how the pastor at their church had caused problems, further explaining that he was supposed to call their parents first about any issues. It sounds like Eric and Shonda tried to intercept any reports about their children, but the pastor did the right thing and called the police when one of the children made a claim of sexual abuse happening in the home. The pastor would end up telling DHS that the Ferguson children would often show up to Sunday school filthy or Timothy would be in a dirty diaper. Nolan would go on to say that they changed churches a lot because the pastors caused problems. It seemed that any time anyone brought up the condition of the children to Shonda, she would become angry and lash out. When the children were taken into foster care, the social workers said that they all seemed to be in healthy condition physically, but it was noted that Timothy's speech seemed delayed. That was likely due to his autism, which hadn't seemed to have been diagnosed by then. The court eventually ordered Eric and Shonda to enter counseling and complete parenting classes. Eric seemed dead set on doing whatever it took to get his children back. Shonda, on the other hand, wasn't really interested in putting in the work. Now, the police reports that I got have a confusing detail that I can only speculate about. After Timothy's death, a woman named Chelsea Calloway contacted the police and gave them details about the Ferguson Vander Ark family dynamic. Chelsea is reported as being Timothy's half-sister, as they had the same father but different mothers. Chelsea was 30 years old at the time of her statement to the police, which means she would have been born in 1992 when Eric was about 16. But that's not what's strange. Her mother was Patricia Gillenwater, who would end up marrying Eric after he and Shonda got divorced. So if I'm understanding this correctly, Eric got Patricia, who goes by Trish, pregnant when he was a teen. They stayed in contact while he was married to Shonda, and then they ended up getting married. And it's clear they stayed in contact because Chelsea's name is mentioned a few times in the various DHS reports. In her statement to the police, Chelsea described that Eric had gotten a vasectomy after Timothy was born. But instead of doing the work to get her kids back, Shonda begged him to get his vasectomy reversed so they could just have more kids. How fucked up is that? Just toss the other kids aside and replace them. That's who Shonda is as a parent. Remember that while she's on the stand making excuses for why she's not a terrible parent. At the end of the day, Shonda would never complete the court-ordered counseling to get her kids back, and she left Eric. Eric began a relationship with Trish, and Shonda began a relationship with a man she had met online named Adam Vander Ark. Adam was disabled and lived in Michigan and eventually moved to Oklahoma to be with her. After Eric and Shonda's divorce was finalized in 2011, both of them married their respective new partners. Because Eric had completed the required actions outlined by the judge, DHS recommended the children be returned to his care. In January of 2012, Eric was granted full custody of the children, with Shonda receiving 3 hours of supervised visitation each month. She was not allowed to be with her minor children unsupervised. DHS recommended the court terminate her parental rights that same month, but Shonda agreed to let Eric have full custody, so that order was never completed. Shonda showed less and less interest in her children as the years went on, and when she and Adam had a child together in 2014, they decided to move to his home state of Michigan. They settled in the city of Norton Shores on the coast of Lake Michigan. At that point, Shonda had managed to finish her degree at Liberty University and was accepted to Cooley Law School in 2018. She graduated at the top of her class in 2021 and went on to pass the bar exam on her first try, which showed that she was highly intelligent. She began working as a law clerk at the 14th Circuit Court in Muskegon. Eric remained in Oklahoma, and Trish became the full-time caretaker for Timothy. Chelsea's statement to the police said, quote, "Timothy is severely autistic but high-functioning. He could take care of himself but did not like being touched, talked to, or loud noises. His parents had to put a lock on his closet door because he would go in there and urinate. He did that because he was scared of the bathroom, especially at night. Timothy was unable to understand simple concepts. If you tried to explain to him why he couldn't do something, he wouldn't understand. He would eat excessively but didn't understand why it would make him sick. To manage these behaviors at home, Timothy was in therapy. His parents received help from psychiatrists and from his school. They also had house rules and a reward system. There were never any restrictions on Timothy eating or him getting snacks. Patricia went above and beyond for Timothy, really trying to help him. Eric was not in the picture because he worked all the time and would not help Patricia. Near the end of Timothy's time with Patricia, she went to Eric and said she needed help. She was getting overwhelmed and depressed. Eric's solution was to send Timothy to live with Shonda. Shonda agreed, even though she was not supposed to have unsupervised custody of her children, and Eric pulled Timothy from school just days before he was scheduled to graduate from his junior year of high school. Why Eric couldn't wait is unknown, as Eric has never agreed to any interviews. By then, Paul had already moved to Michigan to live with his mother and stepfather. That happened when Paul was 18, though, so there was no custody issues as he was no longer a minor. It was speculated in multiple police interviews that Paul didn't want to have to act like an adult, and I guess his father would have expected that of him, so he went to live with his mother so she could take care of him. He eventually got a job at an Applebee's in Grand Haven, 8.4 miles or 13.5 kilometers away from their house. He had an e-bike that he would normally ride to work. At first, things were okay. Family members saw Timothy a few months later at a wedding and he appeared healthy. But in January of 2022, Shonda's husband Adam had a stroke and he moved in with his parents so they could help in his recovery. They lived about 30 minutes south in West Olive. Shonda worked long hours and she became the sole caretaker for her 3 sons. Instead of admitting that she wasn't able to do that properly on her own, she turned the house into a prison for Timothy. She told authorities that she homeschooled Timothy and then gave a bunch of excuses like she wasn't able to enroll him in school since she wasn't listed as his legal guardian, but it didn't seem like she made any effort to fix that. The truth was that she stopped letting people see Timothy so that they wouldn't know how poorly he was being treated. The abuse that Timothy suffered over the next 6 months was unimaginable, but Shonda and Paul documented it all through text messages. By the time Timothy died on July 6, 2022, he had been starved to the point that he only weighed 69 pounds or 31 kilograms. That's the average normal healthy weight for a 10-year-old, but Timothy was 15. After calling 911, paramedics and Norton Shores police officers arrived on the scene and started asking Shonda what had happened. Make sure you pay attention to the fact that all of Shonda's crying creates 0 tears.
Now, you said the last time you saw him was 5:30 this morning?
Yeah.
Did he say anything?
He had fallen out of bed.
At 5:30?
Yeah.
You sure it wasn't earlier?
I mean, it's possible. I thought it was 5:30, but I wasn't super awake. I heard a thump, and I came down, and he's kind of laying on his side, kind of like, what the heck? And I reached out, and I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Sorry. Oh my god. Oh my god. Yeah. And I reached out and he pulled himself up, and I asked him if he's okay, and I just asked if he hit his head. He said, no, I think I hit my knees on my chest. I think. He couldn't tell me how he fell. Oh my god. No, I don't know what to do. Oh my god. He said it was okay.
The way she talks to the officer is really suspicious. She makes a lot of subtle statements that don't relate to the situation, but makes her seem more sympathetic. She told the officer that Timothy's father couldn't handle him because he was always lying, which is unconfirmed by anyone that was interviewed about him. At one point, she just said, quote, "I love my kids," which to me seems like a weird thing to volunteer in that situation. Also, when they go up into the house, it's filthy. There's just garbage all over the floors. When the officer questioned Paul, he said he barely even talked to Timothy and he had no idea he had supposedly been on a hunger strike.
Have you been talking to him at all recently?
I talked to him yesterday morning to get him up.
That was right basically when he started.
Okay, so how long ago was that?
Did you know that he was in this hunger strike?
I think yeah, sorry.
I mean,
Did I tell you or not? I don't know if I did or
no,
not.
I don't think you did.
Is he skin and bone?
I know, and I just, how did he?
He's really.
Well, he doesn't communicate with him hardly at all. Like, they say hi and they don't. Yeah, he's.
Shonda would go on to tell officers that Timothy had been fine up until about a month ago when Adam had a seizure while recovering from his stroke. Shonda would also say that Timothy's father, Eric, had just divorced Trish and was moving to Florida, and Timothy was unhappy about that. The evening of July 5th, she had returned home from work about 6 p.m. and then gave Paul a ride to work because his e-bike had a flat tire. On her way back, she stopped at Qdoba to pick up dinner, and back at home, Timothy wouldn't eat. He finally agreed to eat a few pieces of toast, and she saw him take 2 bites, but didn't know if he ate the rest. To be clear, she explained that she was worried enough about his weight at that time to tell Timothy if he didn't eat, she was going to take him to the hospital, but she did nothing to verify that he actually ate more than 2 bites of toast. She went on to say that at 10 p.m., Timothy got ready for bed, which consisted of him putting on pajamas, using the bathroom, and brushing his teeth. His bed was in the open area of the downstairs half of the split-level home. He slept on a loft bed, which is like a bunk bed without a lower bunk. Instead, there's a top bunk and then something else underneath like a desk or storage. She went to bed at about midnight and heard a loud noise at 5:30. She went downstairs where she found Timothy on the floor and she asked him if he was okay, to which he responded yes. She helped him back into bed and went back to bed herself. She got up for work at 6:15 and at about 6:30 she went downstairs to check on Timothy and he wasn't moving. She said she pulled him out of the top bunk to the floor so they could attempt CPR. When first responders arrived, Timothy was on the floor in a very loose-fitting sweatshirt and a pair of jeans with a belt cinched down so they would stay on his thin body. The question of why he wasn't in pajamas wouldn't be answered until later when it was revealed that most of this story was a complete fabrication. While at the scene, officers took note of several things they found odd. On top of the house being filthy, with dirty diapers on the floor and feces on door handles, they found a webcam that was pointed right at Timothy's bed and a set of handcuffs in an open drawer under the bed. There was a walk-in closet near Timothy's bed, and inside was a blue tarp and a small cardboard box. The officer stated that the closet reeked of urine. They also noticed that the closet door had a sensor on it so an alarm would sound if it was opened, and the handle was set to lock from the outside. Then they started noticing cameras on other parts of the house and that there was a lock on the refrigerator door and the food pantry. When a child dies in that condition and the food is locked away from them, alarm bells start going off for authorities. Shonda refused to consent to the house being searched when detectives arrived on the scene, so they secured a search warrant and returned to the house. A search of the house turned up the handcuffs in the drawer under Timothy's bed that turned out to be leg shackles. They found multiple cameras which were no longer active and didn't have any footage saved to them, except for one. One of the cameras had a micro SD card still in it that contained videos from the days leading up to, including the last night of Timothy's life. Investigators found zip ties as well as a bottle of Elijah's Extreme Regret hot sauce, which was not in the kitchen but in the downstairs bathroom. The medical examiner determined that Timothy had died of starvation and that his internal organs showed signs of hypothermia. The reason for that would be uncovered when investigators read months of text messages between Shonda and Paul. When they reviewed the SD card from the camera, what they found was horrific. The videos took place from July 3rd to July 6th and showed Timothy sleeping in the closet every night. They show Shonda dragging Timothy into the closet and laying him on a tarp, sometimes covering him with a sheet. They show both Shonda and Paul yelling at Timothy. Here, Timothy can be seen completely emaciated, with Paul yelling at him to get up.
Timothy, get up! Come on, it's food time, get up! Now! Get up! You heard me! I've been shouting at you for the past 5 dadgum minutes! Get up! My Come on. Come on. No, you're not. You're being slow. Get up. Stop it. I know it's fake. Stop. Get up. Come on. Hurry it up.
So Paul is yelling at Timothy to hurry up and that he knows his behavior is fake and that will come up with Shonda as well. She'll mention that Timothy was faking his condition, but he's clearly too weak to move at any reasonable pace. This video is the day before he starves to death. So no, he's not faking anything. His body is shutting down because of how his mother and his brother are treating him. He's being starved and locked in a closet for hours at a time. Shonda eventually drags Timothy back into the closet.
Oh, stop. You're being an idiot. And I'm done with it. That's okay. Don't move your hips on that spot. I'll know if you did. And we'll know you did it intentionally.
There, Shonda called her son an idiot for moaning. You know, as his body shuts down due to starvation. She eventually came back in because Timothy had committed the crime of moving his head, and you can hear the door alarm in the background. She repositioned him and then called him an idiot again.
You don't need to open your mouth like that every time you breathe, idiot. See? I know how stupid you're being. Come on, Charlie, get out of here.
She held his mouth shut and told him he was stupid for breathing through his mouth. Those are the things he's being punished for. Not getting up fast enough while emaciated and breathing with his mouth open. It's also interesting that she's able to move the camera around remotely, so Shonda is watching her 15-year-old son while he's locked in a closet starving. But this is her reaction in front of the police.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Officer Stefanich. Right now we got some people coming over to talk to you, okay?
I don't think so. She claimed multiple times that she never knew how skinny Timothy was because he wore baggy clothes, and she would tell other officers that he always wore his hood up. You can clearly see in the previous videos that Shonda not only has full view of Timothy's face, but holds her hand over his mouth, which would have clearly felt as thin as it looked. She also manhandled him multiple times in the video, so she knew 100% how skinny her son was. She just didn't care. Then the investigators looked through Shonda and Paul's text messages. If you think the video shows how terrible they treated Timothy, you better buckle up. In March, months before the supposed hunger strike that Timothy was on, Shonda and Paul exchanged these text messages. Shonda: so how has he been disobedient? Paul: he just won't listen or does something I didn't tell him he could. He just tried claiming his zip cuffs were too tight when I didn't even tighten them to where there's no room for his wrists. What an asshole. A 15-year-old complaining that his zip cuffs are too tight? Wah wah, am I right? Jesus Christ. On the 19th, Paul sent a confusing text about Timothy having gotten some food, because allowing your child to eat is clearly unthinkable. Shonda responded, that only made partial sense. What did he grab? Paul: I don't know, chips or something small he had in his pocket. Shonda: okay, tell him he just started his not eating again. This one is wild because he was obviously already being punished by them withholding food, which is why he was sneaking food. Shonda would state in court that she didn't have a problem with him eating, she just didn't like him sneaking food. But she created a situation where Timothy would need to sneak food. So what's the punishment for sneaking food while he's starving? By withholding food for longer. It's just continual torture. The day before that, Shonda sent Paul a text that read, "You didn't set the motion sensors this morning like you thought you did, and Timothy stole some more food." Yeah, because he was fucking starving, bitch. How do you pass the bar but not understand hunger? After a while, the text started making it clear where the hot sauce came into play. On May 17th, Paul sent a text to Shonda that said Timothy had gotten into food again. Surprise, surprise. They just can't seem to grasp why this starving teenager keeps getting into the food. But since one of the items Timothy had eaten was raw pancake mix, Shonda responded by saying, "That could make him sick, the dummy." Then she sent Paul these instructions. Tabasco in the mouth and make him swallow. But that wasn't enough, so she followed that up with, "And lots of it, and do it every 30 minutes until you leave." Then on July 2nd, Paul sent a text to Shonda asking what he should do if Timothy didn't finish his assigned task in time, and she simply responded, "Hot sauce." It seems that they were using Tabasco sauce at one point, but Shonda would explain in court that Timothy liked spicy food, so they went online and purchased the spiciest hot sauce they could find. That was Elijah's extreme regret. It was made with scorpion and Carolina Reaper peppers, which are some of the spiciest peppers in the world. Spiciness is measured on the Scoville scale, and it's based on how much capsaicin is in the product. Capsaicin is actually a toxin that makes a plant spicy to warn off animals from eating it. The Scoville scale is a number that represents how much the product needs to be diluted in order to neutralize the spiciness. A bell pepper sits at 0. They don't contain capsaicin and shouldn't be spicy to anyone. Pure capsaicin is at 15 million on the Scoville scale, and no pepper has ever been rated that high. The most familiar pepper is the jalapeno, which is rated at 2,500 to 8,000. Tabasco sauce, which is what Shonda had started punishing Timothy with, rates at a paltry 30 to 50,000. The two peppers used in the extreme regret hot sauce were the Trinidad Scorpion, which is rated at 1.2 to 2 million, and the Carolina Reaper, which is rated at 1.4 to 2.2 million on the Scoville scale. The Elijah's Extreme website rates extreme regret at 800,000 Scoville units, so it would definitely be painful for most people, even someone who likes spicy food. Then, on July 5th, the day before Timothy's death, Shonda sent a text to Paul that read, "I wonder how it would feel to have that hot sauce on your private parts. I'm not saying touch him there, not at all, but dripping a little bit there, is that horrible?" Yes, Shonda, it's very horrible. You're a horrible, horrible person. That very text would be brought up at Shonda's trial, where she would pretend to have no recollection of suggesting it.
Right direction to page 6011. Bottom text.
I wonder how it would feel to have that hot sauce on your private parts. I'm not saying touch him there, not at all, but dripping a little bit there, is that horrible?
Did you have to ask that question?
I wouldn't think so. I don't remember that. I can't even imagine saying that.
But you did.
I know, but I can't even imagine it.
About your child, right? Who at that point was in the middle of an ice bath that had lasted at least 2.5 hours at that point, right?
What, are you asking if I said that?
I'm asking you if you said that when your child was in an ice bath for 2.5 hours at that point in time, because this is 4:25 in the afternoon, and you're watching on the camera from work and texting with Paul about what he's supposed to be doing with him in the tub, right?
I mean, if that's what was, I don't remember. If that's what it says, I'm not arguing that. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm just saying I don't know.
It just popped in your head today. Yeah, I wonder what hot sauce on your private parts would be like.
I have no idea where it came from. I have no idea.
She claimed she didn't remember writing that, but you can see on her face, as soon as she saw what the message was, she knew it was bad. She knew there was a record of her instructing Paul to torture Timothy. I honestly don't know what she thought she would accomplish by testifying. But that wasn't all the texts revealed. Investigators also learned that Shonda and Paul had been giving Timothy ice baths as a form of punishment, and not quick dunks in the tub either. They would force him to stay in ice water for hours. That was why the medical examiner found signs of hypothermia on his organs. The night before his death, the entire evening was a series of ice baths for Timothy. Shonda texted, "If you're going to be there, why don't you go ahead and run another cold bath and stick him in?" When Paul asked, "How's that gonna help?" Shonda answered, "It's gonna make him miserable." That was her goal, to make her 15-year-old autistic son miserable, because he didn't want to starve to death. Paul was in no way kind to Timothy even before they lived together with Shonda. Their half-sister Chelsea would make a statement to police explaining that Paul was extremely violent towards Timothy while they still lived in Oklahoma with their father. He did express some concern that Timothy was not well in the texts, though. On June 13th, he sent a picture to Shonda with a message that read, "He's bone thin, Mama. I think honestly we need to actually feed him." Shonda responded by instructing Paul to give him some bread. These texts completely contradict everything Shonda said about Timothy's condition. She said he had started a hunger strike about a month before his death, but the picture showed Timothy at around that date and he was already extremely emaciated. Shonda claimed she had no idea how thin Timothy was, but beside the webcam video proving otherwise, she had been sent a picture that clearly showed how thin he was. Then the way the text is written shows that they knew they were actively withholding more food than was healthy. Paul specifically said they need to actually feed him. On July 5th, Paul sent another picture of Timothy to Shonda and expressed concern that his eyes were glazed over. Shonda shrugged it off by saying he smirked and that a person can make their eyes glaze over if they stare too long. The dynamic between Shonda and Paul is that they need to be harsh with Timothy because otherwise he's going to get away with a bunch of wrongdoing. There's this delusion that he's pulling a fast one over on them and they can't let him win, when in reality they're killing him and he's just trying to not die. With this evidence, Shonda was placed under arrest, first for child abuse and then they added simple murder. Simple murder is just when someone is being charged with murder, but the prosecutor doesn't know yet what specific kind of murder, first degree, manslaughter, etc. Of course, once Shonda learned she was being arrested, she became the most fragile person on the planet.
Okay, I'm lightheaded. I'm sorry.
That's right. Take these on. Can you sit, sir?
Huh?
Can you sit all you said?
I'm trying not to. Oh my gosh. I haven't been able to keep anything down since yesterday.
She does have, she says, allergy-induced asthma, so she can't wear masks.
I had a doctor's note. I didn't bring it with me. I didn't know.
I hate to tell you this. This is not school. Doctor notes do not work. We have our own doctors, and they will deal with you on that.
And then she does have asthma, so she might need albuterol as an emergency, you know.
Do you have a prescription for albuterol?
Ventolin, albuterol.
All right.
Go ahead, follow her.
I'm not in the habit of questioning someone else's medical conditions because I've never been in a situation where it's any of my business. In this situation, though, Shonda seems to be one of those people who tells people she has a laundry list of medical conditions, but based on the information I've been provided, doesn't have an actual diagnosis from a doctor. I believe most of her medical conditions are self-diagnosed and they get used throughout her life to get sympathy from people. She was a hard-ass who believed that a teenager deserved harsh punishments in response to some fairly minor wrongdoings, but as soon as she's the one getting punished, every medical condition and every sob story flies out of her mouth. Before she was booked, she told the officer that her husband had recently had a stroke and she retched into a garbage can and told him she needed her orange juice because she was hypoglycemic. She can dish out the punishment, but she clearly can't handle it. Paul was not arrested at that time. It wasn't until the following day that he was brought into the station for questioning about his involvement in Timothy's death.
I mean, there's clearly a lot of messages about stuff that you guys are doing with him, about what he's eating, about restricting his food. How did that all work? Like, what was he allowed to eat?
We stopped the food restrictions recently because we had noticed the thing. We wanted to get that back on. We didn't want any of this. We never wanted him to be injured or hurt.
Okay.
I loved him so much.
Yeah, I can tell that. I can certainly tell that. When you say we, you're talking about your mother. And
yes, she loved him. We wanted what's best.
Yeah.
The thing is, he was stuck in the past.
You mean back when he was allowed to eat? That seems understandable. Based on Paul's interview, you can tell how thoroughly his mother manipulated him. He told the investigators that his father had told him a bunch of lies about Shonda, including that she didn't care about him and the other children. After having lived with his mother for less than a year, he was convinced that everything his father told him were lies, even though, based on the records of Shonda's actions, his father was absolutely correct. And based on his family history as a whole, I'm not going to say that Eric Ferguson was a great father, but he was absolutely truthful about Shonda not caring about her kids. Shonda made no effort to get her children out of foster care and then moved away after she had replaced them with a new child. It's easy to see why Paul was so attached to her, though. She gave him a position of power over Timothy. She gave him permission to continue bullying and abusing his younger brother. Paul very calmly explained all of the rules and punishments that he and his mother carried out with Timothy. Paul does seem to be more forthcoming about how Timothy was really treated, though he does try to minimize it, at one point claiming they didn't neglect him.
When we talk about bed, I understand we've been to the house and we've been through all the messages.
Yeah.
Where did you sleep most of the nights? In that closet?
Yes.
When did that kind of start happening? Or had you always been standing there?
No, he didn't always.
Okay.
But the thing was, the loft bed, if you've noticed,
Yeah.
the screws and stuff, that was his doing.
Okay.
And we couldn't get it safely back.
Yeah. So, he's sleeping in the closet?
Yes, we made sure that it was cleaned. He had a mattress in there, but then he decided to rip off the cover, like a sort of plastic cover we put on there to keep it from getting smelly and disgusting. We always wanted what's best for him. I don't know.
Unfortunately, so much of what both Paul and Shonda say in this case is them blaming Timothy for their decisions. Timothy messed with the screws on his bed so they had to make him sleep in a closet. Timothy kept getting food so they had to starve him. Paul's statement includes him saying they wanted what's best for him and that they didn't neglect him, and it sounds like he's trying to convince himself of that more than anyone else. When you want the best for someone, the thought of locking them in a closet or dripping hot sauce on their balls never even crosses your mind. Paul said that Timothy didn't sneak food because he was hungry, but it feels like the whole dying of starvation thing proves that to be untrue. He would be the first to admit that the entire story of the evening that was told by Shonda was a lie.
So you guys pull him out. Does he have pants on or no pants on?
None, no.
And when we get there, he has pants on?
Yeah, she had me put them on.
She asked you to put pants on? What was that for?
I don't know.
And so you guys, at that time, she decides that she's going to lie to him and say that he was in the bunk bed? I don't understand.
I don't know.
She
doesn't want to seem like she's bad, that we weren't neglecting him. And even if if it somehow ended up like that, it was never intentional.
Right. Well, what you're saying, I mean, if we talk, right, there's all these things where you're like, she didn't want it to seem like this. She didn't want it to seem like this. She didn't want it to seem like this. Did you know that it all seems like that, right?
Yes, I know.
It does. And he clearly was neglected because he died from it, right? The reality is that he was. That's why we're here talking today. So, he was very much neglected. And the fact that, she had asked you to put hot sauce on his private parts. Do you remember that?
She asked, but I never did. I never
did that?
No.
Okay. And she had asked you to put hot sauce directly into his mouth. Did you do that?
Yes.
Is that on the 5th, the day kind of leading up to all this stuff?
Yeah.
How much hot sauce did you put in there?
Dad?
And whose idea was that to put that hot sauce in there?
Hers.
And what was the purpose of that?
Again, she thought the whole unresponsive was an act.
She thought it was an act. Which clearly, very clearly it wasn't, right?
Yeah.
Where is the hot sauce that he used? Is that the one that was in the bathroom, or is there a different one?
That was the one in the bathroom, yeah.
Okay.
I have a hard time considering what they did as neglect. Neglect to me is sort of unintentional. A parent who's not present due to drugs or just doesn't care about the child, so they fail to provide proper care. But Shonda was actively taking actions to cause her child suffering. That's not child neglect, that's child abuse. She tortured him, stating in one text message that the purpose was to quote-unquote make him miserable, and Paul was 100% a willing participant. Paul ended up pleading guilty to 1 count of first-degree child abuse and was sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison. In exchange, he agreed to testify against his mother at trial. She, of course, pleaded not guilty and chose to testify in her own defense, which is crazy when you see how much the prosecutor has that makes her look like a monster. There are videos of the days leading up to his death in that closet. One of those videos shows Timothy die. At about 4:30 a.m. on July 6th, you can see him take his last breath. I saw the video. I'm not going to play it here because I don't make snuff films. After a few hours, Shonda tried to get him up.
Come here.
Yeah? What's wrong?
I don't feel like breathing or anything.
Timothy?
Move, Summer. All right. Move, Summer, you gotta move. Am I wrong?
No.
Oh my God.
Timothy.
Come on, buddy.
Timothy.
No. This can't happen.
Timothy. Hey.
Is he okay?
I don't know yet.
Keep pushing. I don't feel anything, Paul.
He's resisting.
Is he resisting?
He's resisting.
Or is he stiff? Is he okay?
He feels... He's cold, Mom.
Yeah, I know he's cold, but he's not stiff, so is he okay? Sit him up, please. Come on, sit him up.
In the video, you can hear Paul claim that Timothy is resisting when Paul turns his head. Except that he's not resisting, he's going into rigor. Then Shonda had Paul take Timothy's body down near his bed, dress him, and lied to the police about what had happened the night before leading up to the death. You don't immediately make up a story about how your child died if you think there's no problem with the way they were treated up until their death. On top of that, they documented all of the abuse they committed against Timothy. Shonda was at work all day, so she texted Paul with instructions on how to punish him.
Have you ever given hot sauce to the dogs, to train the dogs?
I have put it on a couple of objects to keep them off of objects, yes.
Keeps them away from it, right?
Yes, it does.
Right, because they don't want to eat the hot sauce.
Mm-hmm.
So you never actually grabbed a dog, forced its mouth open, and poured hot sauce down its throat, have you?
No.
Never put hot sauce on a piece of food and then fed it to them, make them eat it, have you?
No, because I don't give my dogs human food. You can't do that with service animals.
No, but you could put it on dog food, couldn't you?
I guess I've never even thought about that, honestly.
So it never occurred to you to use hot sauce, forcing the use of hot sauce on a dog, but it occurred to you to use that as a form of punishment for your 14-year-old child?
It was Paul's idea, but yes, I was at my wit's end at that time.
It was Paul's idea, and you thought, yep, that sounds like a good idea. I think we'll do that. Is that what you're saying?
I don't remember the exact conversation, but I said, like I said, at that point I was willing to try anything.
We'll get into the text, but there's dozens of texts in here, and this is just a small section of text where you tell Paul, put more hot sauce on the bread. Give him 4 slices of hot sauce. Do you remember those text messages?
Some of them, not very many, but some of them.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't punish a dog with hot sauce, but it's okay to punish a child with it.
The thing that pushed my anger over the edge with this case is the way Shonda acts on the stand. Her stubbornly trying to convince anyone that she didn't do anything wrong is shitty enough, but her cold, emotionless answers are just awful. And she does this thing that happens a lot with narcissists, where they focus on a detail in the question that's incorrect, but not important to the question. Like, would you put hot sauce on a piece of bread and give it to a dog as punishment? She responds, I don't give my dogs human food. It's a way to not answer the question. She does it again here.
Would you stick a dog in an ice bath as punishment?
That would never occur to me. But then having big dogs, I don't bathe them at home anyway. I use dry shampoo or I take them somewhere else. I don't have a facility.
I'm talking about as a form of, I'm not talking about giving them a bath. I'm talking about using,
I don't have
as
space.
a form of punishment, putting a dog in an ice bath.
I don't have space to do that, so I wouldn't think of that because I don't have space with that size dog.
You're saying if you had a large enough tub to punish one of the dogs, you'd put them in an ice bath?
I can't imagine doing that, but...
You can't imagine doing that. Right?
Correct.
You can't imagine punishing an animal by putting him in an ice bath.
Would you stick your dog in an ice bath? I don't bathe them at home. This woman is supposed to be extremely smart and she can't understand what a hypothetical question is? No, she's deliberately finding ways to not answer the question. And to be clear, she absolutely did give Timothy ice baths. She sent Paul a text message on the evening before Timothy's death that she was pulling him out of the bath and putting him in the closet. She minimizes the ice bath, saying it wasn't a lot of ice, as if that makes it better. Adding any ice and forcing a child to stay in there for hours is still abuse. She mentions how small their ice maker is multiple times to try and reiterate that they weren't able to give him an ice bath with a lot of ice. But then the prosecutor introduced these texts.
Let him know that if he tries to sleep at all, let's start there. This is at 3 o'clock in the morning. You're saying he is not allowed to go to sleep, right?
Yes, sir.
So 3 o'clock in the morning, your 15-year-old child is not allowed to be sleeping. And if he does, he gets an ice bath, right?
Yes, sir.
And he'll get another ice bath, i.e. there's already been an ice bath prior to this text being sent, correct?
No, sir. It would be one and then another, is what it says.
Okay, well, let me read it again and make sure maybe I misread it. Let him know that if he tries to sleep at all, he'll get another ice bath sometime before you leave for work and another when I get home. There's two anothers in there, isn't there?
Yes, sir.
The first another refers to the first ice bath. In other words, there's already been an ice bath, right?
I don't know. I'm not questioning what's in the text, but I don't know.
Okay. And then sometime before Paul leaves for work, he'll get another ice bath, and then another one when you get home. So 2 ice baths, in addition to the one he's already had, right?
If that's what it says.
And that's for the crime of sleeping.
I don't know what the original, whatever happened before that.
But you know what it was to get him to not do another one, right?
Yes, sir.
Let him know that if he tries to sleep at all.
That's what it says, yes, sir.
Yeah. Might want to toss the ice that is made into some Ziploc bags in the freezer tomorrow for if we need a bunch more. I think that kind of speaks for itself. We'll move on.
Oh snap. So she mentioned putting the ice in a bag and saving it in the freezer. Now, some of you may not know this, but I own an almost identical ice maker to theirs. Mine is a different brand and it's not covered in filth, but that does segue into my point. I clean the ice maker about once a month. Not so much on the outside because I don't live in squalor, but minerals in the water like calcium will build up on the inside and you need to run some vinegar water through it to keep it clean. I like my drinks ice cold. I drink iced coffee in the morning and then I have an insulated metal water bottle that I keep filled with ice water throughout the day. So the day before I clean the ice maker, I take a big Ziploc bag and I fill it with ice. In one day, I can collect quite a bit of ice. And if you fill a bathtub with cold water, then put that ice in, you get freezing cold water, hence the hypothermia to Timothy's organs. She can say they didn't use much ice. She can say their ice maker doesn't make that much ice, but the autopsy showed it was cold enough to cause hypothermia. It was after that the prosecutor showed her pictures of Paul at the time of his death, to which Shonda vomited or pretended to vomit into a garbage can. Curiously, the only time she ever felt so sick by her actions that she threw up was when she had an audience she wanted sympathy from. A lot of attention has been given to Shonda's moments of vomiting, passing out, and other theatrics. But what I think is more important is her answers to exactly what happened to Timothy the night before he died.
Those 3 photographs depict your son hours after you supposedly put him in a warm bath. Did he look like that when you put him in the warm bath, but for the fact that he was alive?
I did not look at him, sir. He was 15. I tried to give him his privacy. It may sound lame, but I intentionally look away. That's why Paul did most of his baths, is because he's 15 and I didn't think that was appropriate.
So you didn't put him in the bathtub?
No, he was already in the tub. I just looked.
Did you get him out of the tub?
I don't remember. I think so. Later that night, I would assume so.
Later that night? How long was he in the tub?
Well, night to me is any time after work. So.
Okay. How long was he in the tub?
I don't think it was long after I got home, but I don't know.
And again, you didn't tell the police officers this when they talked to you about what had happened the night before, did you?
I don't remember. Apparently I didn't.
Well, so you don't remember what you told the police officers?
I remember part of it, but if you say I didn't tell them, then I trust your word there.
If you told the police officers that you noticed he was skinny, so you made him some bread and put some butter on it and watched him eat 3/4 of it and then sent him to bed, does that refresh your recollection about what you told the officers?
I hear what you're saying. I don't remember saying it, but...
So you don't remember saying those things to the police officer?
No, sir.
And those things clearly didn't happen, did they?
No, sir.
How did he get into his room that night?
I don't remember, sir.
Last page of the text messages. You can go ahead and read that very top text message, please.
Please set your alarm for 6 a.m. I ended up dragging him back to his small room because I wasn't going to risk him having access to the tub or other things overnight. He's still trying to be stupid, but I will tell you more tomorrow while I take you to work, describing how many different ways I proved that he's still faking. He's still doing it, though. It's beyond ridiculous.
I ended up dragging him back to his small room because I wasn't going to risk him having access to the tub or other things overnight. Plan was for him to sleep in the bathroom, wasn't it?
I don't remember, sir. I know that in the text message, but if that's what the text message says.
Okay. And you had to drag him back to the small room. Again, the small room being the closet, right?
Yes, sir.
Supposedly that he wanted to sleep in.
Yes, sir.
But you had to drag him there. Why was that?
Well, dragging, that could be anywhere from grabbing hold of an arm and because someone's not being cooperative. That can be a range of things, sir, so I don't know what I was referring to there.
Her answer to everything is to acknowledge the evidence that shows she did it, but has no memory of doing it. You cannot be this nonchalantly absent-minded about what happened in the hours before your child's death. You texted that you dragged him, but that word could have meant a number of things, and you don't remember what you meant by dragged when you took your child to the closet where he died a few hours later? Fuck you, lady. Her memory is a blank for everything that shows she's a horrible person. But when the prosecutor accidentally said Timothy was 108 pounds on a certain date, she immediately corrected him that Timothy was 104 pounds. Her memory is fine. She's doing everything she can to not take any accountability for her actions despite the evidence against her. Any decent person who sees this amount of documentation about the long-term abuse of their child would show some regret and apologize for their actions. Shonda either blames Paul or claims she can't remember doing it. She's one of the most horrible people I've ever covered. I think that I received some documents that would have normally been redacted, and I think the coverage of this case minus those details has made people underestimate Shonda and Paul's actions. There are some documents that came from Oklahoma DHS that I didn't use in this video because I don't think it would have been right to publish that information, but I can guarantee you that Shonda is much worse than I've ever seen the media portray her. I'm going to make a video where I read all of Shonda and Paul's text messages to each other while displaying the printouts as I read, so you can expect that within the next few days. The rest of her testimony is just her making excuses for her actions and lying. When the prosecutor brought up a text message where Shonda called Timothy a dummy, she claimed she was just upset and would never say that to his face. But remember this?
You're being an idiot. You don't need to open your mouth like that every time you breathe, idiot.
I know how stupid you're being. Come on, Charlie, get out of here.
Yeah, she said it to his face. Fortunately, the jury didn't believe her nonsense and relied on the clear documentation that she and her son made while they were abusing Timothy to death. Shanda Vander Ark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At her sentencing, the judge said, quote, "I'm not going to let you hide in the darkness anymore. People know what you are now. I can't wrap my mind of how someone could do something so horrific, not just to another human being, but their own child." Before we reach the exciting conclusion of this episode, I just want to remind you that we're trying to hit 1 million subscribers this year, so before you go, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Even better, tell someone else about the channel so they could subscribe too. Then make sure you both turn on notifications so you always know when a new episode airs. You can also support the channel by checking out our merch at thisismonsters.com. A link is in the description. Your support is appreciated, and be kind to each other. The following day, Shonda's parental rights of her youngest son, Gabriel, were removed, and he's now being raised by his paternal grandparents. Shonda has been back in court in an attempt to get a new trial. There hasn't been a decision due to delays because Shonda constantly claims she's sick. You know, because she's self-diagnosed every ailment she could possibly think of in order to get sympathy and special treatment behind bars. Her complaint is that her lawyer said something to the jury she didn't agree with, but unless it changed the outcome of the verdict, it's not likely she'll be granted a new trial. It's been reported that both her and Paul have complained that the food in prison is not good, and Shonda has complained that her cell is cold. Isn't that awful? At the end of the day, a lot of people failed Timothy. His father, Eric, sent him to live with someone who was not supposed to have custody of him. The state of Oklahoma didn't follow up with his whereabouts after he was sent to Michigan. He was just pulled out of school and disappeared, and nobody questioned it. Nobody that knew the family in Michigan ever checked on the teen after Adam had a stroke. Those things would have helped, but the most important thing is that Shanda Vander Ark and her 20-year-old son Paul Ferguson actively abused Timothy so severely that he died. He starved to death, not because they neglected to take care of him, but because they actively tortured him. They documented months of physical and mental torture where they refused to let him eat, locked him in a closet, punished him with the hottest hot sauce they could find on the internet, and made him sit in ice baths for hours. They both knew exactly what they were doing while they were doing it, and it's an insult to the rest of society that they want us to believe they loved him and they were doing what they thought was best for him. Things that Shonda admits she would never even consider doing to her dogs. Timothy was said to have been a loving child who enjoyed many things in his life. He deserved better than the monsters that he got. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.